Okay, I'm joined by a friend, buddy, colleague, Caden McFarland. He is the sports director at KJRH here locally in Tulsa. Caden, how you doing, man?
RJ, I'm doing very well. It's an honor. It's an honor to be joining you. You know, there are not many things I do well in my life. I can't do anything on the grill. I can't fix anything around the house. I just have very few skills. My wife would be the first to tell you. But talking about Notre Dame football, kind of like Rudy's buddy told him in the movie when he gave him the leather jacket on his birthday, you were born to wear that jacket. I was born to do this segment. Let's go.
I'm here for it. All right, so the first question that I had for you as it pertains to, Notre Dame football is which game can you not afford to lose to make the national championship?
Well, I don't think a one-loss Notre Dame is making it.
Really?
So the answer that if you thought they could survive a close loss to Clemson and make it, you would say Wisconsin is the game they can't afford to lose. And it looks like, the last I heard, that game was likely to be moved from Lambeau to South Bend because of some of the COVID concerns. And that's a very different game depending upon where that's played. But I don't think this Notre Dame team can get in this year with a win over Wisconsin being the best thing they've got on their resume. To me, they got to beat Clemson. So it's Clemson now. Those are long odds, my friend. But yeah, if they're gonna make the playoff, unless there's chaos elsewhere, to me they got to beat Clemson.
I don't know. I'm taking a hard look at this schedule, and it looks like the weakest game on it for me is probably Georgia Tech or Western Michigan, depending on how you feel about what Jeff Collins can do in year two. But, it's not a terrible schedule. I mean, Duke could be serviceable, right? Navy's going to be Navy. I like Arkansas. I don't expect them to win that game. I think it's going to be a good litmus test, and that's one I'm really got circled because if Notre Dame wins that by 4 touchdowns, I get to continue to talk about Notre Dame as having a chance to make the college football playoff. If they don't win that by 4 touchdowns, I'm going to look around and go, all right, is this gonna hold together? Because
Sure.
if you lose the game to Wisconsin, but you beat Clemson, you're getting in. You're getting in.
Well, I like your odds a whole lot better if it falls that way than if it goes the other way.
Right.
Wisconsin's your best win, and you lose to Clemson on your home field.
Right.
Look, with regard to Notre Dame's schedule, it's not as tough as it used to be. Lou Holtz would, by the time this thing was over, they would play 4 or 5 top 10 teams very often. It's not quite what it used to be, but it's a good schedule. And I love to use this. So this would have been 2018. I used this stat all last year in talking to people. The conference that had the worst non-conference record in road games in 2018 was the Pac-12, and this is of the Power 5. And that doesn't surprise anybody because the Pac-12 has been number 5 out of the Power 5 conferences for some time now. But the conference with the best home record against non-conference foes out of their region was also the Pac-12. And the point there is, it's hard to leave your region and play road games. And Notre Dame does it every single year. They go all over the country, and they play teams that are very different in terms of their approach. You're going to see Navy in the triple option every year, and then you'll see teams out west that are way more wide open. Graham Harrell now has brought the air raid to USC, and they're going to see teams 5 times a year from the ACC where there's better athleticism and just generally faster, team defenses at least. They see everything, and they have to leave their region. They play a schedule. I'm not sure they get the credit they deserve here and now for the schedule they play because of the diversity of it. Is it as tough as some of those teams in the SEC when you catch the wrong guy? You catch Alabama and Georgia in the same year. No, it's not quite that tough, but it's about as good as anybody else. And I really think the diversity of it and how far they have to travel is a big part of it. So, look, the schedule's always really good. Is it the very best you can find like it used to be? No, not necessarily. But they're playing a schedule. And look, when you play Clemson and Wisconsin and you have to go to L.A. at the end of the year to face USC, for top 3 or 4 teams you're going to face, That's pretty good. Is it the very best it can possibly be? I mean, you can probably find a few schedules that are tougher, but not many.
It's also a thing that Notre Dame gets to leverage, and we call it a wash because you don't play a college, you don't play a conference championship game. Like that's the reason that it does not get the credit that it should get, right? Is because you get to cherry pick in a way that nobody else gets to cherry pick in this open marriage with the ACC. So like, I'm for it if they're in the ACC, but if they're in the ACC, they don't get to schedule with this amount of variety, as you pointed out. So I think it is what it is. And because Notre Dame continues to say we're Notre Dame, the rest of us kind of feel some kind of way about that. And that's just the way that it goes, right?
Well, and look, it depends on how it plays out. If you beat Clemson, who likely is going to be the ACC champion, and then let's say you beat a USC team that's up near the top of the Pac-12, and you beat a Wisconsin team that's up near the top of the Big Ten, it's hard to keep them out. If they go undefeated, I don't see how you can keep them out, even without that 13th data point, even without that conference championship game, because they've done so much damage against teams at the top of the conference. But if there was no Clemson on the schedule, if the Wisconsin game was played in South Bend and that was the very toughest thing they faced all year long, there has been years when Notre Dame's schedule ends up not being nearly as tough in reality as it looked like maybe it would be on paper. And I can certainly understand, especially, if you're in this state and you're an Oklahoma fan, and say they go 12-1 and they win the Big 12 championship game, say they beat the Texas a second time. If Notre Dame is able to navigate a schedule where, like you said, they kind of get to pick it, and there isn't a Clemson on there, like, they don't play Clemson most years, I can certainly understand some of the angst coming from people. Now, I'm trying to remember when Notre Dame did make the playoff a couple of years ago. It ended up being pretty clean. Would it have been maybe Ohio State on the outside looking in that year?
It was Ohio State. It was.
They had themselves to blame because they had lost by like 5 touchdowns
to Iowa.
I think maybe it was Iowa or Purdue, right? And so, look, you can certainly envision a scenario in which even a 12-0 Notre Dame maybe doesn't have a top 4 argument. If there are 4 really strong conference champions elsewhere. But most of the time, because of the schedule they play, how representative it is, the diversity of it, if they can go 12-0, likely they've earned a spot. 11-1, I'm with people very often on that. I can understand why that 13th data point becomes much more important under that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, and to build on that Oklahoma comparison, we're in a year where most analysts are picking Oklahoma to make the playoff because they play in the Big 12 and because they're going to be favored in every game that they play. And yet I'll be the first person to point out Iowa State happened at home. Kansas State happened on the road. And that conference game matters to so many because, okay, they're kind of like us. Notre Dame wants to live apart from us, so let them live apart from us. And then the 2018 Clemson game still comes back because it looked like that bad USC team, I think 5-7, was within a nose hair of getting a W, and all of us are going, this team is not good enough to be in this playoff, and they're like, hey, check the record. It says 0s in the loss column. So I get it, and I'm interested in how this is going to go, and I'm already, I want a 16-team playoff. I hate the 14 playoff, but that's just me. But it's a moot if Ian Book doesn't actually become the player that I expected him to be last year. So with that in mind, like I know the dude's first guy in school history to go for 2,500 yards passing, 30 TDs, and 500 yards rushing, but like, is he a top 20 quarterback in FBS? I don't think so. Do you think so?
Top 20 is interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's probably top 20. If you were to just watch him throw the ball, could I find 19 or 20 guys who have a bigger arm or appear to be a little bit more of a pure passer? You probably could, but frankly, that's not how we judge quarterbacks, right? It's everything that goes into it. At OU, all of those quarterbacks get the benefit of Lincoln Riley calling the plays, and look, that gets factored in into their effectiveness. Ian Book showed me last year, even though he was not as good as the numbers would tell you. I think he ended up throwing 34 touchdown passes, and I think he had at least 6 rushing touchdowns, so 40 total touchdowns. That's elite. He was more uneven than those numbers would show you, especially at the start of the year. But he did figure some things out down the stretch and was really solid and understood what the team needed from him better as the season went on. I think if you factor in his ability to get away from the rush, he is really, really good at that. His ability to beat you with his arm and his legs. His accuracy, even though his completion percentage took a step back last year, he was completing 70% of his passes 2 years ago. In most throws, he's really, really accurate, and he did get a little bit better throwing the deep ball last year. I think if you throw everything in and then the guys that he has around him, that offensive line, I definitely think he will be one of college football's 20 best quarterbacks this year in terms of production and effectiveness. And I think, to me, it wouldn't surprise me a bit if he was top 10 and maybe even could inch a little bit higher than that. I think pretty highly of Ian Book, and I don't think that's because I'm a Notre Dame guy. He has his naysayers in the Notre Dame world, without a doubt, because everybody wants somebody who throws it around like Pat Mahomes, somebody who throws it around like Spencer Rattler. He's not that guy. He was a 3-star kid. The arm talent doesn't just jump off the screen, but I've got a lot of respect for his grittiness. And the fact, look, they went 12-1 2 years ago. They went 11-2 last year. It wasn't great every single week. It was a little bit uneven at times, but he's my quarterback. I said on Twitter in response to some Notre Dame fans earlier this offseason, there are two types of Notre Dame fans in my mind. Those who consider everything that the Notre Dame football program has been and hasn't been over the last 25 years and say, thank you that Ian Book is our quarterback in his 5th season in South Bend. And then there are the kind of people that I wish would just find a different team to root for. Because if you're comparing him to Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, no, he's not in that conversation. So Oklahoma fans wouldn't look at Ian Book and say, oh, thank God we've got this guy. But if you're a Notre Dame fan and you've seen some of the quarterback play we've had over the last 2 decades, I just say thank you and move on with your day. This guy's been really, really good for Notre Dame.
And I guess that's what I compare him to is he's supposed to be great. Like, I do put him in the same category as Jalen Hurts, but you also know how I feel about Jalen Hurts. I think Ian Book in Lincoln Riley's system is a different quarterback. That said, I think he's also better when he's on the move. Like when I went to Sanford for Georgia and Notre Dame, they were best when he was outside the pocket. Now, that led me to what I really wanted to know from you, because I'm looking at that offensive line, and it looks like the kind that can win a Joe Moore Award. They're going to return 5 starters. But are they going to have anybody to run the ball? They're going to have anybody that's going to be able to, take advantage of that? Or is it really just going to be Ian Book trying to cook without Chris Fink and without Chase Claypool and throwing Jordan Johnson in there to the Wolves as a true freshman?
It is without a doubt the biggest hole in recruiting in recent years. Autry Denson, former great running back who was running back coach until last year, just was not fired up about recruiting. And at that position, especially at Notre Dame, where you're always having to go out of region to get elite guys, man, you got to be a dog on the recruiting trail, and he simply didn't have a passion for it. It's a problem, without a doubt. They are far from elite. They've got a high 4-star, really speedy guy coming in Chris Tyree, but you can't imagine that a guy, especially now that, the voluntary workout season has taken a hit with COVID, you can't imagine that guy is going to be ready to tote the rock enough to be, the featured back. Jaffar Armstrong is a guy who switched positions. He was a receiver at one point, and in 2018 had a pretty nice year at running back, but couldn't stay healthy. And then last year got hurt on the very first series of the year against Louisville, a groin injury, and never really did get right. He's the guy with the best combination of experience and the tools, but he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And they are not elite at that position, and really they're not even close. If they were, you really could begin to talk yourself into, because as you mentioned, 5 returning starters on the offensive line, and really it's 6 because of how much Josh Lugg has played as well. Right. I think they may be a little bit overrated, because I've read some people think they'll have the best offensive line in the country, or the 2nd or 3rd best. To be honest, I don't think they're quite there. This is not Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley. This is not some of those first-round top 10 picks that they've had in recent years, but it's a nice selection of guys who have played a lot of ball together. I think they're going to be very effective. And, yeah, if you had a great running back behind Ian Book, you really could talk yourself into Notre Dame certainly being undefeated going in to take on Clemson, and you would feel a whole lot better about facing Clemson in that situation. But there is no doubt this is a good roster all the way around. It's a really good roster. I think a top 10 team between 8 and 12 is a great place to rank Notre Dame. But they are not elite. They're not even close at the running back position, and it probably is a problem. That said, if Jaffar Armstrong can stay healthy and the light can go on for him, and we've seen that because Brian Kelly's player development has been really good for the last decade, and every year there are 2 or 3 guys who haven't done much, and then as a senior, it all clicks. If he becomes that guy, I think it does allow them to go to another level. Or if Chris Tyree is just that dude from day one as a freshman, that allows them to go to a different level. But as it stands, you wouldn't go to the bank on any of that. And so if you were to line up Notre Dame and all the other teams that consider themselves to be college football playoff contenders this year, I bet you Notre Dame is dead last in terms of running back talent.
I like Chris Tyree. I liked him when he committed last April, I want to say, like April 2019. But, like, that kid is the fastest kid that I've seen come out of that area since Travion Henderson this year, who's committed to Ohio State. But, like, he can fly. So if you get him the ball in space, I trust him. If you're asking him to run between the tackles, maybe not so much. So if he's DeMarco Murray light. He's not that big. He's not going to be that big, but he's fast, and he's got great hands. So it'd be interesting to see what Tommy Rees is able to do once you get him on campus. But on the other side of the ball, I'm used to having to talk about a Notre Dame defensive back when we get to the Jim Thorpe Award roundtable, talking about semifinalists, and then later about finalists. And, a couple years ago, I really loved Julian Love, right? He got my first place vote over DeAndre Baker, who won the award in 2018. And then last year, Alohi Gilman. And this year, one of the reasons I wanted to go to Notre Dame Sanford, or Notre Dame Georgia at Sanford, was to see Kyle Hamilton, who's from the Atlanta area. Do you think that he's ready in his sophomore season to assume that role of being the dominant Notre Dame defensive back?
I got to tell you, I think in what I've told you here so far, I think I've earned my stripes as a pretty rational and reasonable Notre Dame fan. I'm not too high on Ian Book. I was brutally honest about the running back position. I just said our offensive line maybe is a little overrated. I'm telling you right now, every Notre Dame fan I know, and this is mostly in the social media world, and then my brother, we are irrationally confident about Kyle Hamilton. We simply have not seen a guy like this in South Bend, RJ. And you mentioned Julian Love, who was, oh my gosh, he was so productive and he was so tough. I loved him, but he ended up being a middle round pick, and didn't play very much for the New York Giants in his rookie year last year. Kyle Hamilton is a cut above, maybe 2 above even a guy like Julian Love, who was ultra productive. Now, they've got to protect him. Some of those, there are some pieces back there in the secondary that are question marks. And if there's a weak link back there, I think Kyle Hamilton, his ability to make plays can really be hurt if somebody's constantly just throwing away from Kyle Hamilton. That's possible. But, this guy as an athlete is so good. I am begging Brian Kelly to put him in on offense. I want to see the Charles Woodson thing. He is, in my mind, that good. We have not had a center fielder at the safety position like Kyle Hamilton. Not since Lou Holtz, man. Not since the early 90s. There's no way that Notre Dame is at this kind of talent back there. So I could not be more fired up to see what he does. Now, they're going to have to be good. They're going to have to protect him some. Sean Crawford and Tariq Bracy. Crawford's got to stay healthy. And Bracey's got to take a step forward and be a guy they can count on. And then at that other safety position, whether it's Isaiah Pryor, who transferred from Ohio State, or Houston Griffith, who was a high 4-star when he was recruited a few years back, they've got to become really serviceable, better than serviceable, good safety. But if that happens, if they've got all of that in place and the D-line stays healthy, if this is a good defense, Kyle Hamilton can take them to another level because he, in my mind, I expect him to be the best player on the Notre Dame football team this year as a true sophomore. His talent is just different than anybody else they have. This Notre Dame roster, with the exception of running back, doesn't have holes. There are good players all over the field. They go 2 and 3 deep. They develop their guys. Brian Kelly does that. But they've only got one Kyle Hamilton. He is the most special talent on this team, without a doubt. So I know that Clemson and Alabama, they have like 4 and 5 or 6 guys. Like, I get that. But for Notre Dame, like, we're relishing this because we simply don't. This is we protect Kyle Hamilton at all costs, my friend. Like, this dude is special.
I got like 5 dudes circled on my list of defensive backs to keep an eye on and to watch them whenever possible, right? Derek Stingley Jr., who LSU and myself think of in the way that y'all think of Kyle Hamilton, so now I'm really intrigued. Patrick Surtain, right, at Alabama, because you know what that is. I look to Ohio State, of course, with Sean Wade.
Everybody at Ohio State.
Right, right. Well, I mean, it's hard not to at this point, right? Because 7 first-round picks in 4 years. And then Caden Stearns at Texas if he can be healthy, because I've had that kid circled for 3 years now. So to hear you talk about Kyle Hamilton in this way, 1, affirms my belief from last year, and 2, I am interested to see what they do with the defense, because the safety is a dependent position, especially if you're the center fielder, right? Because the box safety is going to have more opportunities to make plays in the middle of the field. Meanwhile, Kyle Hamilton is going to be more or less a ball hawk, unless they want to do something different. But I don't know, man. That leads me to the question about the defensive line. Do you think you can get pressure with 4, or are you going to have to send 5?
They're committed to getting pressure with 4. Like, that is priority number 1 in Clark Lee's defense. It's going to be harder this year than it was last year because Khalid Kareem is out the door, and so is Julian Aquara. And look, those guys were drafted in, I believe, top 3 or top 4 rounds for a reason. And last year they were so deep at defensive end. Really, they could go with 4 defensive ends, and did a handful of times on in 3rd and long. It's a little bit different this year, where I think maybe they're stronger in the middle than they are even at end. But Adi Ogundeji and Dalen Hayes, who comes back, are both guys that you can really count on. I think both of them are seniors. I think both are mature, smart kids who play with passion. I like both of them. Hayes has had trouble staying healthy, but he could have a monster senior year. Ogundeji has just been really solid, really good. And I like the guys, Isaiah Foskey, who I'm sure he was a 4-star kid. Just looking at him, he looks like you want him to look. And then Justin Adamiola. Like, they've got some depth. They've got some pieces you like. It's not like what they had at Clemson 2 years ago when they won the national title. Right?
Nothing's like what they had at Clemson 2 years ago. Nothing is.
Exactly. I mean, they're not there, but yes, I think they should be able to get a pass rush against most everybody with 4. When it comes to Clemson, when it comes to Wisconsin, even, okay, sometimes you're going to have to be a little bit trickier. And that's one thing Notre Dame does. They're pretty vanilla on defense most of the time, but they are going to try and throw some things at you, in the big moments against better opponents. And, I think for the most part, they'll be able to get pressure with 4. And the linebacker play should be exceptional. Owusu Karamoa, I said Hamilton's probably the best player on the roster. If you're talking about proven production, Owusu Karamoa is really the best player on that defense, and I expect him to be really, really good at Rover again. He was peaking at the end of last season and just took apart that Iowa State offense in the bowl game. Linebacker's not a question. I think the defensive line, even though it's not as sure a thing as it was 1 year ago, I think they're going to be really good. And if we're talking about, going back to what we just said, if we're talking about allowing Kyle Hamilton to become a game wrecker, to me it's going to be on those corners, on the starting corners, and then the safety next to Hamilton. Those are the biggest question marks. I don't think too many people who know Notre Dame football well are too worried about what they have on the defensive line. It's not the best that there could possibly be, but it's going to be really, really good. It's like an A-.
Let me give you a doomsday scenario, circling back around to the top, where Wisconsin has a loss and does not make the Big Ten championship game, where Clemson has a loss against perhaps a really good, let's say North Carolina type of team, right? Where they don't stop that 2-point conversion. If Notre Dame runs the table still, do you think they make the playoff, or is it just out of their hands?
I think if Trevor Lawrence is on the field, when they beat Clemson, yeah, I think so. A guy who won a national title, played for another. people respect him and that Clemson staff. We know what Clemson is. If Notre Dame beats Clemson by hook or crook, and they're undefeated, I feel really good about them making the playoffs, even under a scenario in which you imagine some of the strongest possible conference champions from those other leagues. But I don't think they can afford a loss anywhere. You mentioned what if they beat Clemson but lose to Wisconsin? Even then, man, I would not feel good about their chances unless there was mayhem elsewhere. Because we have moved on, man. It's different. It's Notre Dame is not the only school on TV every week anymore. They haven't won a national title in 30 years. They are not the team that college football feels like it needs to protect more than any other anymore. And, I think the conference champions, especially, if we see now, if Baylor goes and wins the Big 12, well, that's different. But if it's Oklahoma, like, we all expect, it's those name brands at the top, it's going to be hard for Notre Dame to get in with the loss. Now, getting past the Pac-12, that's doable. And, then you just need help from one other conference. But, the threat of there being two SEC teams in any given year, to me, they've got to run the table. And I think that's the mindset most people have there. Nobody at Notre Dame thinks, hey, if we go 11-1, we really ought to be in. They know they've got to navigate the schedule. And by the way, that brings me to something I wanted to say about Brian Kelly. Look, he's not the absolute best coach there is out there. It seems consistently there's a position where they just didn't recruit it well enough. Right now it's running back. It's been different things at different times. But one skill he has that's pretty unique, in the last decade, decade and a couple of years, he's gone 12-0 in the regular season 3 different times. Once with Cincinnati, twice with Notre Dame. When he's got a veteran team, a veteran quarterback, you mentioned that USC game a couple of years ago where they just did beat a 5-7 USC team. That happened. And on Notre Dame's schedule, it's going to happen when you're traveling coast to coast and you're playing teams all over the place, and a lot of them are really good. You're going to have weeks when you're not at your very best. But he does a good job of kind of understanding the temperature in the room, understanding where his team's at, how to win games when you're not at your best. And when he's got a really good team, how to overcome the toughest spots on your schedule. Now, that said, it hasn't happened against teams that are in the top 5. He had a shot 6 years ago against Florida State. They thought they had the thing won and had a penalty called on them in the end zone, and they weren't able to beat that Jameis Winston-led Florida State team that was the defending national champ. They haven't been able to get it done in the postseason in the biggest spots against Alabama in the national championship game, against Clemson, against Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl a few years ago. Against the elite of the elite, they haven't been able to do it. But he is able to manage a schedule really, really well. And to me, managing the schedule this year is getting to Clemson undefeated. I don't expect them to beat Clemson. You're hoping for something magical to happen on that day for that to go down. But he will have managed the schedule well if they can get to Clemson undefeated. And obviously that starts with Wisconsin, but it's also some of those tricky games. What is Arkansas going to be in week 2? I don't think they can come into South Bend and win, but you would expect that team to be better and certainly be different. They'll be a bit of a curveball. And then obviously Stanford is a traditional rival, and having to play them only 7 days after you play Wisconsin, that's tough. At Pittsburgh, it's a road game, right? Teams lose road games. To me, it's just, can he manage it well enough to be undefeated when they play Clemson, and that gives you a shot to play for everything. And I think that's what Notre Dame fans hope for. Nobody goes into a Notre Dame season saying, hey, if we can just get a break here, we can win the national championship. No, they're further down the line than that. It's if we can get a break or two here, we'll have a chance in the month of November to play for the playoff. That's best case scenario for Notre Dame right now. That's being reasonable. They are not. You can draw a big red line after the top 3, 4, 5 teams in the country. They've got a certain level of talent, and Notre Dame ain't that. And so you're just in that second tier, maybe third tier, where you can put together the kind of season, if you can stay healthy and play your best here and avoid a letdown there, where you can give yourself a chance. But they're not going to go win a national title, RJ. You know that, and I know that.
Caden McFarland, he's the sports director at KJRH here locally. Caden, I enjoy talking college football with you. I enjoy just hearing you talk about Notre Dame because you are very passionate about it, and I am so appreciative of you taking time to do this with me. Thank you.
My pleasure, man. Like I said, I was born to do this segment. There may not be another thing in my life that I do as well as this. So, hey, anytime you want to talk Notre Dame, I'm ready. It's good talking to you, man.
My man, Caden McFarland.